I was folding laundry when his phone buzzed on the counter. I wasn't trying to see it. I want to be clear about that, because for years afterward, people would ask if I'd been looking for something. I wasn't. I was folding his shirts, the ones I still pressed myself even though we could afford a service, because some habits from a poorer version of our marriage never left me. The screen lit up next to the fruit bowl. I glanced at it the way you glance at a buzzing phone that isn't yours. Reflexive. Meaningless. Except it wasn't meaningless. It was from Priya, his assistant. The message said, "She still doesn't know. We need to tell her before it's too late." I stood there with one of his shirts still warm from the dryer, and I felt something in my chest go very quiet. Not loud. Not shattering. Quiet. The way a room gets quiet right before you understand you're not alone in it. 12 years of marriage compressed themselves into that one sentence on a screen, and every version of my future rearranged itself in the space of a breath. I didn't cry. I didn't call his name. I didn't march down the hall to find him. I set the shirt down, smoothed it flat on the counter like it mattered, and I picked up his phone. I typed one word back. Tell her what? Then I put the phone down exactly where it had been, picked the shirt back up, and kept folding. My hands didn't shake. I want you to understand that. Whatever was breaking in me, it wasn't going to break on the outside. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if I could help it. My name is Elena Hargrove. I'm 38 years old, and I'm a forensic accountant. For 14 years I've made a living finding the one number in 10,000 that doesn't belong. The transaction someone thought was small enough to hide. The account someone assumed no one would ever open. People think my job is about math. It isn't. It's about patience. It's about the discipline to not react to the first thing you find, because the first thing is never the whole story. I built a career on the belief that truth doesn't announce itself. It waits, quietly, for someone patient enough to go looking. I didn't know yet that I'd need every bit of that discipline for my own life, in my own kitchen, with my own husband's phone in my hand. I married Marcus 12 years ago. He was warm in a way that made rooms feel safer just by him standing in them, and ambitious in a way that made me believe we were building something that would outlast us both. He started his logistics company 2 years into our marriage, and I did what wives who love ambitious men do. I picked up slack. I turned down a director-level position at my firm, because someone needed to be home when the business ate our evenings. Someone needed to answer the calls from vendors when he was in meetings. Someone needed to be the soft place he landed at the end of long days. I told myself it was temporary. Most sacrifices tell you that. What I carried heaviest, though, had nothing to do with his business. It was the 5 years we spent trying, and failing, to have a child. Doctor after doctor ran the same tests and came back with the same maddening shrug. Unexplained. His mother, Diane, was never cruel about it exactly, but she had a way of asking after my results at family dinners that made it clear where she'd already placed the blame. She'd mention, almost gently, a cousin who'd fixed her diet and conceived within the year, or a friend's daughter-in-law who'd tried some new specialist in the city. Small comments, dropped like pebbles, until I was carrying the weight of a small mountain. I absorbed it. I let it settle into me like sediment, year after year, until I half believed it myself, that whatever was broken between us was broken in me, specifically, and not in the marriage, and not in him. Priya joined the company 3 years ago. She was sharp, capable, endlessly organized, the kind of person who anticipates a problem before it exists. I liked her, if I'm honest. She remembered my coffee order without being told twice. She sent flowers when my father was in the hospital, an arrangement so thoughtful I remember being surprised an employee would go to that trouble for her boss's wife. I used to watch her manage Marcus's calendar with an ease that made my own attempts at organizing our lives look amateur by comparison. Admiration and envy wear the same face sometimes, and for a long time I couldn't tell you which one I actually felt watching her orbit my husband's professional life so effortlessly. Which brings me back to that Tuesday, and the shirt I kept folding, and the phone I'd already put back exactly where I found it. I want to walk you through that moment again, because the first time I told this story, I left out how deliberate I was. Marcus came home 40 minutes later. He kissed my forehead, mentioned a supplier issue in Ohio, asked what was for dinner, moved through our kitchen like it was any other Tuesday in the world. I watched him check his phone once, twice, a slight furrow in his brow at a message he apparently didn't remember sending. He said nothing to me. He didn't ask if I'd seen anything. That absence of a question told me more than a confession would have. That was the moment I made my rule, the one I'd repeat to myself for the next 6 weeks. Gather everything before they know you've seen it. So I didn't confront him. I opened a file instead, an actual manila folder. The old-fashioned kind, because digital files can be searched and I didn't yet know who might go looking for them. I called a lawyer I trusted, not to file anything yet, just to understand what documentation would matter later, what would hold up, what wouldn't. I began doing, quietly, at night after he'd fallen asleep, what I do for a living every day. I started looking for the number that didn't belong. It didn't take long to find the first one. A recurring wire transfer, monthly, going out of a business account Marcus rarely touched personally, to something called Havenbrook Family Wellness. Not a restaurant, not a hotel, a clinic. I sat with that for 3 full days before I did anything else, because people who think they will never get caught leave the messiest trails, and I wanted to see the whole trail before I followed a single thread of it anywhere. I found the appointments next. A shared calendar Priya managed for him, one I technically still had access to as an emergency contact from years earlier. that listed recurring blocks labeled only MH, personal, always on a Thursday, always for 90 minutes, always with Priya listed as attending alongside him, her initials logged beside his in the notes field, like she was more than an assistant, like she was a partner in whatever this was. For a week, I believed I had my answer. I believed I was building a case for an affair. Bank records, a clinic, secret meetings, a woman who texted she still doesn't know, like she was carrying a secret too heavy to hold alone. I even started drafting, in my head, late at night, the exact sentence I'd say to him when I was finally ready. I rehearsed it in the shower. I rehearsed it in traffic. Then I found the invoice that didn't fit the story I'd built. Havenbrook Family Wellness, it turned out, wasn't a discreet hotel, or a rendezvous point, dressed up in corporate language. It was a reproductive endocrinology clinic, and the charges weren't for dinners or gifts or hotel suites. They were for something called a fertility preservation consult, followed months later by something else entirely, a genetic screening panel, and beneath it, in smaller print I had to enlarge twice to read clearly, a diagnosis code I didn't recognize until I looked it up at midnight at my kitchen table. A hereditary condition affecting sperm viability, one that can be present for years, quietly, with no outward symptoms at all. I sat with that printout for a long time, long enough for my tea to go cold beside it. The deeper secret didn't come from Marcus. It came from his mother. Diane called me 3 weeks later, her voice thinner than I'd ever heard it, and asked if she could come by. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd found that diagnosis, and told me that Marcus had been diagnosed as a teenager, after a childhood illness that had gone untreated a few weeks too long, with the same condition I'd read on that printout. That his father, before he died, had made Diane promise never to let it define him, to a future wife, because he believed, in the stubborn way of that generation, that it would make Marcus seem lesser, less of a man, less of a catch. That Diane had carried that promise for 20 years, watched me blame myself in silence at her own dinner table year after year, and said nothing, because she'd convinced herself protecting her son mattered more than protecting me from years of grief I didn't need to carry alone. She was the one who finally told Marcus it wasn't fair to me anymore. That's what Priya's text had meant, that Tuesday on the counter. Priya wasn't the other woman. She was the assistant managing his private medical appointments, coordinating with a specialist, and quietly, desperately, pushing him for months toward the conversation his own mother had once asked him never to have. We need to tell her before it's too late. Wasn't about an affair at all. It was about a fertility window closing, and a truth that had already cost me 5 years of blaming my own body for something that was never mine to blame in the first place. I confirmed all of it with his doctor, a soft-spoken specialist named Dr. Okafor, who, with Marcus's signed release, walked me through the diagnosis, the timeline, the treatment options that had existed all along, and the fact that Marcus had known, in some form, since he was 16 years old. Long before he ever knew me, long before he let me carry years of silent guilt at his mother's table, apologizing with my eyes for a body that had never been the problem. I wasn't in the room when it finally came out to the wider family. I heard about it secondhand, from my sister-in-law, who described it to me in more detail than I ever asked for. She said it happened at Diane's birthday dinner, of all places. That Diane stood up mid-toast, her hands shaking around her wine glass, and said she had something to confess before she let another year pass carrying it. She said the table went silent, in that specific way, rooms go silent right before something breaks. She said Marcus's face drained of color as his mother spoke, that he reached for his own glass and didn't drink from it, just held it, like it was the only steady thing left in the room. She said his aunt actually gasped audibly when Diane said the word diagnosis, and that nobody looked at Marcus for a long moment afterward. They looked at their plates, the way people do when they don't know if it's their place to react to someone else's unraveling. I met Marcus 3 days later, in my home office, on my terms, in the one room in that house that had always been entirely mine. I didn't know how to tell you, he said, sitting across from me looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Every year that passed made it harder. And then it wasn't just my secret anymore. It was hers too. And I let that become an excuse to keep saying nothing. I understand why you were afraid, I told him. I understand why a 16-year-old boy didn't want a diagnosis to define him for the rest of his life. What I don't understand is the 38-year-old man who let me sit across from his mother for 5 years and absorb blame that was never mine to carry. Understanding why you did it isn't the same as forgiving what it cost me, he asked, quietly. If there was any version of this where we found our way back to each other. I told him I needed time to answer that honestly, and that an honest answer might be no. It was no. We handled the separation the way I handle everything. Thoroughly, fairly, without theater. I used every skill I have to make sure the split of the business and our shared accounts was clean and equitable. I didn't need to punish him financially, because that had never been the injury that mattered most. When his lawyer floated a reconciliation clause into the settlement conversation, I declined it with a kind of finality that surprised even me. Quiet and complete, like finishing the last page of a book you already know the ending to. 2 years have passed since that Tuesday with the laundry. I left my firm 18 months ago and started a small practice of my own. Financial counseling specifically for women navigating divorce, fertility-related grief, or both, because I learned firsthand how much clarity people need, in exactly the moments they're least equipped to find it. I help women build the same kind of quiet, methodical case for their own lives that I once built at my kitchen table at midnight, printout by printout, number by number, until the truth had nowhere left to hide. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't making someone suffer. It's refusing to carry a lie that was never yours to hold in the first place. If you were in my position, finding out the secret wasn't the betrayal you assumed, but a truth someone else had buried for 20 years, would you have made the same choice I did? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and what you think I should have done differently, if anything. And if stories like this one stay with you, subscribe for more. There's always another quiet woman with a case to build.